This is a recording for the CUPHAT project, Coastal Uplands Heritage and Tourism. My name is Daniel Carey. Today is the 25th of July 2023 and I have with me here Brigid Fox. Thank you, Brigid. Can you confirm for the recorder that you're happy to take part in this project?
I am.
Thanks. And could you spell your name for the recorder, please?
Brigidfox.
Lovely. I thought we might start by just asking you about your early memories of growing up in the Blackstairs area.
Oh, I think it was probably a very, not a very interesting childhood, really. I went to a two-teacher school in Drummond, in St. Mullins, and so I only had two teachers in the school. We didn't have a car, we didn't have any great luxury, very basic food. My father worked very hard, as did my mother. She was equally as important. We had 6 acres of land, so we had pigs. We had my father worked outside of the home. He was a farm labourer for a good number of years, and then he eventually got work with his brother working on buildings, and he continued that up to late in life.
What are your memories of school?
I suppose we had what was called the mistress and the master, and I was the second youngest in the family, so I was a long way behind. There's 10 years between my older sister and me, and 16 between my older sister and my younger brother. So quite a difference, I suppose, in one sense, but in another, school life was very similar no matter what. And I remember my early reading, which is funny. I remember the teacher teaching the first few words to me, and there was a picture of a man in the bed, and it was "Ned is in bed." And I can remember that very well because Ned was my uncle, and it made a big impression on me. So that's my probably earliest memory of school life. And I suppose things were hard. Teachers ruled by the cane a bit at the time, and big classes. There was no great, nothing really for those who couldn't keep up. My other big memory, I suppose, was I was chosen to read the proclamation for the 1916 commemorations, and that was a very important thing in our house. My mother was always very determined. She hadn't gone to secondary school herself, nor had my father, but she was very determined that we would all do well, and she'd have spent ages just coming in after working kind of outside, milking cows, which she did by hand. I can still kind of hear the milk going into the enamel can or the bucket in my mind. So when she'd come in, she'd make sure that, she'd ask us our spellings, and the catechism, of course, was very big, and learning off big passages out of the Bible. And she always insisted on that. No matter what time we went to bed at, we would have had to have all our homework done, and she'd have helped us as best she could. The maths got a bit harder as she went on, but I particularly remember the 1916 thing because the master gave us out. There was these free books given out. They were given out, I think, to every family, and the proclamation was in it. And I was in 5th class only, and there was only 3 of us in 5th class, 2 boys and a girl, and there was 4 in 6th class. And he said that there was going to be these big commemorations. There's a triangular field in Drummond, and we were going to be walking around the triangular field, and then the reading of the proclamation was going to take place. So it was very big. And there was another lad who was hoping to read the proclamation. So Mammy went over it and over it and over it with me at night, and a lot of the words neither she nor I could pronounce. There was 1 or 2 of them in particular. And but my sister, who at that time was working in Wexford, came home at the weekend, and of course she knew everything. So she was able to tell us how to pronounce it. I know there was one word anyway which was spelled like August, but it was pronounced August. And neither Mammy or I could understand how on earth could August be August. So anyway, we practiced and practiced and practiced. And the teacher didn't really ask us to read it, only once maybe. And then we thought, oh, he must be after giving up on us. We mustn't be going to do it at all. And after all the practice, I was horrified. So then he said yes, we were going to be reading it. And he ruled out the 4 6th class pupils. And I think it was the Friday before the event, which was, I think, on a Sunday. There was just the two of us left, this boy in 5th class and myself. And it was going to be one or other of the two of us. And I tell you, that night we practiced a lot at home. It went on for hours, August or no August. And as well as that, anyway, he picked me in the end. And to this day, that other guy and myself always have a big laugh over it. And we were at a school reunion not too long ago, and he said to me, and you got to read the proclamation, you know. But the other interesting thing about that particular time, which is maybe why I remember it so much, was my sister made my dress. And it was made from pink linen. And she bought the material and she made it for me. And my mother stayed up almost all night knitting a cardigan to go with it. And I have a photo that wasn't taken on the day, but taken a week afterwards, actually, because a man from Ballywilliam, Mr. Dwyer from Ballywilliam, called to the house the week after and said that maybe we'd like to have a tape recording of the proclamation. And he took a photograph with his Polaroid, and I still have that photograph. I don't know where the tape is gone. I think that disappeared over the years. And anyway, we didn't have a tape recorder at the time, so I don't know what good it was going to be to us. But anyway, he was very decent about it. And while my sister was making the pink dress, there was a need for buckles, and we were searching everywhere for a buckle. And in the end, every box in the house was taken down, and we finally found a gold buckle that had 2 parts and little pearls on it. But there was one of the pearls missing, and it had come from America to the woman who my father was a farm labourer for. So anyway, she put it on it. And I remember after I read the proclamation anyway, and I didn't make a mistake, which was great. And it was very important that I read it, because my cousin from Comer was reading it in Rathnewer, and another cousin was reading it in Glyn. So it was very important that we were up there with the other cousins, one on my father's side and one on my mother's side.
So yeah, that was for the reading was for the 50th anniversary,
50th
in 1966.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
What did the school building look like?
Oh, it was built actually in 1954, and the year before I was born, and it was 2 rooms, just the 2 rooms. And of course I thought at the time it was huge, but sure, going back there for reunions or whatever now, I realise that it's very small, really, all in all. And
you mentioned that your parents hadn't gone to secondary school. Did you go on to secondary school? Did you all go on to secondary school? Or?
We did. My older sisters, my brother went to New Ross, to school in New Ross, and he won a scholarship after the first year, so he ended up then in Knockbeg in County Carlow. And my oldest sister was a year older than him. She went as a boarder, which must have been terrible hard for my parents to have been able to allow her to be a boarder, for 3 years, I think, in the Mercy in New Ross. And then when my other sister started, they rode bicycles from home, which is about 7 miles every day. And like, they had hardship. They had their books weren't even in a bag. They used to be on a strap, and they'd carry them on their on the bike. And then near Ballyan, which is a couple of miles out, the Barrow would often flood, and the road would be flooded, and they'd be trying to cope with that as well as just getting there. School, even in my time, school was on a Saturday as well as the 5 days of the week. One of the neighbours had a car, and sometimes in very, very wet weather, they might get a lift with them. But in general, all the neighbours as well rode. So I was the first year of the free transport. So that was maybe lucky for me. So I got a bus from, it was funny because I got a bus where I live down in Drummond and St. Mullins, were right on the border. So I got the bus in a place called Powell Mounty, because you had to get the bus in County Wexford to get to New Ross. Otherwise you had to go to Graiguenamanagh, but there was no bus. You had to go to Glynn to get a bus to Graiguenamanagh or to Borris. It might even have been only Borris at the time. So it was easier walk down to Powell Mounty, which was a short distance away, and then the bus would actually come back up that road to go via Ballywilliam into New Ross. So they hadn't worked it out very well, because they probably didn't know how many people were going on the bus, because I know the bus route, the first few, maybe for the first month, was absolutely thronged, and they made 2 bus routes out of it in the end.
Okay. What are your memories of secondary school?
I didn't particularly like secondary school. I think it was because I was a country girl, and the townies were very sophisticated besides us, and I had hardly ever even been in a town beforehand, which now probably is amazing to think that we wouldn't have been. But as I said, we had no car at home, so it was either the bicycle or nowhere, and Mammy would have gone on the bike now and again to buy flour, but and things like that, but and Daddy had the bike going to work. Later he had a tractor, but he never drove a car, and I had never really been in the town. So my memory, I suppose, is the uniform, wearing a navy uniform, and I'm not saying bullied, but I think being maybe overawed by the townies and the boarders. The boarders seemed to be very well off as well, or didn't seem to come from us. But gradually, of course, as time went on, we got to know people. Another thing, I suppose, was by the time I started in secondary school, both my sisters had entered the convent, and they were nuns. And I think their reputation went before me, and that was maybe a bit of was something maybe that influenced me a bit there as well, that I was always under their shadow, that maybe I wasn't quite as good as they were, or maybe I had something to keep up with,
Okay. What did you do for fun when you were growing up?
Oh, well, in primary school, I always had a skipping rope, so I would have done that. We didn't really do very much. I suppose we made dolls out of sticks and leaves, and my sisters were kind of gone from the home to a certain extent, so I didn't really play with them. And my younger brother was 6 years younger than me, so we played a lot of cowboys and Indians, and I was always the Indian because he had a cowboy hat and a gun.
Very good. You mentioned in the piece you read that we'll put up separately that you have Blackstairs heritage on both sides of your family. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, my grandparents on the Wexford side, though I never met them, they were both dead before I was born, were from a place called Cummer, which is a very desolate kind of an area. Even still today, there's not very many houses in it, and my grandparents on the Carlow side, then I did know both of them. And in particularly my granny, because she lived up until 1977, and by then I had a car, and we'd collect her and bring her to our house, and she always wore black from the time my grandfather died. in 1966, and my grandfather, on I suppose one of the things that sticks out for me in my maternal grandparents was my grandfather died on Christmas Day, which was a very big thing to have happened, and there were no phones, and my uncle came to the church in Drummond where we were at Mass and called my mother out to tell her her father had died. Now, he hadn't been well because he had leukemia, and I remember that day particularly well. I don't know if you want to hear the story, but we had the usual, I suppose, for Christmas Day. We had turkey and we had various different things, and as soon as my mother went to the home house where her father had died, another uncle came with a van, took the car. They had just been kind of renovating the house where he died, and my father actually had been the one who was doing the renovating, but they came to the house. They took the carpet off the stairs to go on their stairs. They took chairs from the parlour. They took the turkey, and they left us with a chicken. So there was, my brother was there, who was 9 years older than me, and my younger brother, who had just had Santi call, and myself. So I think I was probably 11 or 12 maybe at the time. And my brother was left to do all the chores, but we only had a Rayburn cooker. We had nothing else. And no matter what we did, we couldn't light the cooker. Mammy always lit the cooker. And Pat, like at this stage, he was 18 or 19 and should have been able to light the cooker, but no matter what we did, we couldn't light the cooker. So we couldn't have anything to eat. We didn't even have an electric kettle. So here we were trying to boil a kettle and heat up this chicken for the dinner. And Pat, he got everything. He got papers. They went out. Finally he went outside, and I think he might have brought in a little drop of petrol. I don't know what he brought in, but the cooker went crazy. It lit up. We heated up the chicken or whatever. By now we were all starving, and then there was a little clock thing on the front of the Rayburn cooker, and we were waiting for it to go kind of from cold to cool to moderate, but it went all the way around to hot, and it wouldn't move from very hot in the end. So that's my memory of the day my grandfather died. Isn't it funny that these are the things that stick in your mind?
Yeah. We're still in the Blackstairs now, but we're in Michael. How did you end up in Michael?
I ended up in Michael because obviously of my husband. We met through Macra na Ferma. I was in Drummond Macra and he was in Michael Macra, and it was now you have online dating and all this kind of thing, but Macra was the big place to meet people. And the first time that we met, we were in a debating competition against one another, and the topic was that married women shouldn't work outside the home. And there were 4 men on the Michael team, and there was 4 of us anyway. I was the leader, and I think he always says that he thought, oh, that one, I'll bring her down a peg or two now, but he wasn't the leader of the other team. But anyway, we didn't meet then. A few months after that, he was at a dance in New Ross and I was at a dance in New Ross, and he remembered me from the debate, and then eventually we were going out together for 4 years, and we eventually got married. And I was a primary teacher, and I was teaching in Graignamanagh at the time. I taught there for 6 years, Graignamanagh in County Kilkenny, and a vacancy occurred in Michael just the year that we got married, and I applied for the position. At that time, you wouldn't even dream of travelling to Graignamanagh, and like, it's so near now, but at that time you'd be looking for something as near to home as possible. And I got the position in Michael, and I spent 21 years in the school in Michael. Very happy, loved the area, loved the children and the parents, and I became one of the community, I suppose.
Was teaching always something you wanted to do, or when did you
Yes,
make that
I
call?
think I did want to become a teacher, I think, from a very early age. And you were talking there about childhood. I remember when my younger brother was born, and I was always, after he, like once he came 4 or 5 or less even, I was always teaching him. And he knew the alphabet forwards and backwards before he went to school. And I think it was probably through my influence, because we were thrown together a lot. And I had was toying between. I always liked kind of sewing and knitting and things like that. And at that time, you did sewing in primary school, and then you did it. I did home economics in secondary school, and it wasn't scientific based in those days at all. It was cooking and sewing, and I would have made my own outfits and things like that. And I was toying between being a home economics teacher or a primary teacher. And when I got the results of the Leaving Cert, and I qualified for both, and I did an interview. The interviews for both colleges, and they actually were the same day in Dublin. But I got word about the primary school first, that I had got that. It was kind of a week, maybe, or a few days later when I got word of the other, but I had accepted the primary school teaching. But I'm glad. I never regretted it.
Was that in St. Pat's, or where?
No,
where did
it
you
was
go
in
to school?
Carysford.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
and like being the first of I was the last year of the primary, doing the primary in primary school. I was the first of the free transport to secondary school, and I was the last of the 2-year course in Carysford.
Okay. How did you find college life?
Oh, I loved college life. It was brilliant. Like, living in Dublin, I thought was wonderful. You could hop on a bus, you could go wherever you wanted, you could do whatever you like. And I think I fitted in better, I think, than I used to maybe at the beginning of secondary school. Really enjoyed college life. And I didn't live in college digs. I lived in digs out in Dunleary with a wonderful family, and they treated us like their own. And my best friend from secondary school, we shared a room. She did primary school as well, and is teaching in Rathnure in the Blackstairs as well for a good number of years, and is living in Rathnure, as it turns out.
Did you teach the same year or group, or what, did that vary over your teaching career?
Well, when I was in Graignamanagh, I had infants all the time. For the 6 years I was in Graignamanagh. And when I came to Michael, I had first and second, and I had them for a good number of years. And then the infant teacher wished to move up when a vacancy came in the school, and I went back to infants, which I probably preferred at the time. That first and second involved First Communion, of course, and all that goes with that. And I basically had infants then for the rest of my time in Michael. And then a remarkable thing happened, I suppose, then around the year 2000. We were all the same. There were 4 of us in the school at that stage in Michael, and we were all the same age. And numbers had dwindled a lot. There was talks of housing estates going up, but nothing concrete. And apart from the principal, who was going to hold his position no matter what, I was the last in. Just by a year, but I was still the last in. So I had to start looking that, despite being there for 21 years, I might have had to leave, and I would have been put on what was called a panel. And it would have been, even though we're on the borders, I couldn't go towards Wexford. It would have been within, I think it was within maybe a 30-mile radius. I'm not sure now, that could be maybe a bit more. So I could have been going up Kildare somewhere, especially because down south you were just going to St. Mullins, and you were stuck within kind of 20 miles down there, and there wasn't much in the line of vacancies in that area. So it was within the diocese of Kildare and Loughlin. And a position came up in Kilmichael, across the border in County Wexford, in the parish of Bunclody, and as principal. And I applied for that, and I got it. And I spent 9 very happy years in Kilmichael as well.
How did you find being principal compared to class teaching?
I suppose it was a challenge, really. But I kind of had different roles of responsibility while I was in Michael, so it was a step up. And but I had fifth and sixth when I went to Kilmichael, and that was probably a big change for me, going from infants. And I had them for a couple of years, and then confirmation and everything that goes with that. But then I moved back to third and fourth when an opportunity came, and that was probably where I preferred being more than anything else. The problem about being principal in a rural school, there were 4 classrooms. The teachers were all much younger than me, but I loved it. That I was like the granny, I suppose, in a way with them. But I think there was the 2 schools, Michael and Kilmichael, funny with the name as well, were very different. We were all of the same age in Michael, and we knew one another really, really well. So we passed a class from one to another. We knew what was expected of us, and we knew the next teacher would know what she was getting, And in Kilmichael, it was very different. It was very open. The teachers were all young. The curriculum was changing at that time as well. And while we were maybe settled in our way in the old curriculum, they were all very enthusiastic about the new curriculum, which was probably maybe a bit more of a challenge. And the one thing I would say about being principal of a rural school is that the same post comes in the door almost as if you have a 25 teacher school or a 45 teacher school. So you had that to contend with, as well as teaching your class every day. So I was busy, but I did enjoy it. I liked it.
How has Michael changed since you arrived here?
Well, in relation to the teaching, it was funny. I was only about 2 years in Kilmichael when a housing estate went up, and I could have kept my job, I suppose, here. But it didn't do me any harm to move. I think it was good. And there was a parish in between us, kind of, as well. Well, when I came to Michael, again, if I could refer to the school, I would know from year to year what children were going to start. We were bogged down in the whole area, so I'd know everybody. Now with housing estates and people moving in and a diverse community, it has changed a good bit, I suppose, but the landscape is still the same, and the mountain is still there behind us, and I suppose there's more opportunities, and I think our community has become more diverse, and I think that's a good thing. I like that.
You mentioned the mountain there. Do you have a favourite spot in the uplands to visit?
Well, I suppose I like going to the Nine Stones and up Slieve Bawn. I try to walk that, maybe not every week, but pretty regularly. Also Kilbranish, the woods in Kilbranish. I hear the cuckoo there at the particular time of the season, and the heather always beckons me, I think, and yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Describe the view or what you see on that on those walks.
Well, I can see Mount Leinster from my own backyard, which is always very nice to know. When we go up, we normally cross over, we climb up, and yes, the heather, the sheep, of course, are always there. Sometimes there's a horse or two, and then when we look out over the fields, we can pick out as far Wexford, Carlow, Kilkenny, various places really. But if you walk far enough, say for 3 or 4 hours, you end up in Wexford. So you start in Carlow and you end up in Wexford.
How would you describe the area to someone who hasn't been here before?
The village now, or the surrounding area?
Village or surrounding area, however you want to.
Well, the village was a planned village, and I think it still has maybe some little pieces from that era, even in the mentality of the people. I think when I came to Michael first, everybody knew I was the teacher, of course, but also everybody knew, I suppose, that I was the blow-in. And there's little aspects of that sometimes come out. People have there has been a lot of people maybe marrying one another within the village or whatever, more my age group than younger, of course. But the village is set in the shadow of Mount Leinster, and I'd say in the past maybe it was a big barrier. There are lovely sounding names of townslands like Colasnachta, Ratnagira and all of these places, but they also kind of echo how hard Colasnachta could have been in the winter, and you know how difficult it must have been for people to come down to the village and do their shopping. And like I think that the village has grown. The community centre, for example, the small hall in the community centre was the coach house for the landlord back in the 1790s and before that. So that remnant is still there. It is a picturesque village, but of course it has had its like the different influences, particularly I suppose the recession hampered it, where there were 3 pubs when I came here first. There's now only one, where the shops were very affluent, but and they're not now. They're struggling to make for people to make a living out of them, and I think we are lucky though. We still have a health centre, we still have a Garda station, we still have the post office, and I hope we can keep those as much as we can, and local doctor. Surrounding it then, like you have, biodiversity is the buzzword at the moment, and there's plenty of that around, and we're very lucky to have a lot of good community groups. The GA is very strong here. They have, even though they're not winning at the moment, but they had 6 senior titles in a row at various times. You could find at least 100 children in the playing fields at any time. That's very good for young people. I think in general it's a good place to rear children, and I was very happy to have reared my 3 here.
Talk to me a little bit about community life in Michael.
Well, I suppose I'd be one who was always involved in community. I was in a youth club, I think, when I was 12, and then of course I was in Macra Ferma, and I'm in a lot of community organisations here in the village, but that's just the way I was brought up. I think my father would have done different things for nothing, and my mother was a very good community person, so I probably got that from them, and maybe even from my grandparents, I don't know. But we have Muintir na Tíre, which is a very valuable organisation here. It kind of covers textile art, tidy towns, different programmes under biodiversity, and then we have the community centre. There's another one in Drumfay, so there's social dancing over there. We have folklore storytelling night here once a month, and nearly every night there's something on. There's Keep Fit, there's the schools use the community centre as well, and then there's the playing pitches. And we have what I think not a lot of places have. We have a lot of green areas that are free to visit and to be utilised by the local community. So I think that's very, very important. I think somebody once doing some kind of a feasibility study called them green lungs. So we have 2 parks. We have the Millennium Park and we have Tubervrida. There's the pond, and there's a lot of history involved in those as well. So I'm very proud of the fact that I have been involved in the development of a tree trail, because some of the trees go way back to the 1800s, 1700s and 1800s, and I was involved in a heritage project, the development of a heritage trail. And then I'm involved with the Columbanus route as well, which is taking us from the 9 Stones really down into the village, and all up to Bangor in County Down, and further afield into Europe, France, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Germany, and on to Bobbio in Italy.
Okay. Just to maybe touch on some of those aspects. You mentioned You mentioned biodiversity there earlier. Can you say a little bit more about the biodiversity and the sort of plants and animals in the area?
Well, I suppose you have all the wild animals, the usual ones, the rabbits and the hares, stoats. I've seen the odd one around the village even. And bird life. We had a bird survey done a time ago, and I think there were 25 birds spotted during the bird survey. Bats as well. We had a bat survey done a couple of years ago as well, and there's quite a variety of the bats as well that hover in the area of the Adelaide Memorial Church and the pond, of course, and down into the Millennium Park. Then as regards the actual growth, it's a good farmland area in the air generally, except of course as you go up the mountain where you just have the scrub and the heather, but you have part of our winter era. We have just a new person has joined us relatively recently, and he has been sowing a lot of bringing back some of the wild flowers to some of the areas. And last year we had fantastic, they're not quite as good this year, sunflowers. So they were part of a project involving Ukraine, and we sowed the sunflowers, and they were just fantastic last year. They're not quite as good this year, probably because of all the rain.
Okay. You mentioned history there as well. Tell me a little bit about the local history.
Well, there's a couple of things I suppose that are very significant. First of all, as I said, Michael was a planned village, and it involved the local landlord who lived at a place called Michael Lodge, which is no longer there. It was burned in 1922, but we've a lot of information about him because almost on a daily basis he wrote to Dublin Castle reporting on various activities of the United Irishmen. So we have letters that are in the National Archives which give us a great insight into what life was like at that particular time, and particularly his life. He was obviously targeted on a number of occasions, and he didn't exactly treat the United Irishmen very well. But in his letters we know of various houses and churches that he went to in order to capture the various United Irishmen. But one thing stands out more than anything else, and that is that there is the story that the Croppy Boy actually relates the original story of the original Croppy Boy. It has its roots here in Michael, in that and we can more or less prove it actually, that the prisoner was questioned in Lord Cornwall's house, though he was never a lord, that was just a derisory name for him, and that he was sentenced to death, and he would have gone through Borris, and he would have gone on then down to Duncannon, and where he would have been captured or whatever in Duncannon Fort. But there's one very positive thing that comes out of that. There was a Father Kavanagh here at that particular time. There's a plaque on the wall of the church to Father Kavanagh, and he's supposed to have made a deal with Robert Cornwall to save the lives of some of the United Irishmen in exchange for them doing some work. And Cornwall is supposed to have asked that they build a road, because the other one, the road was too near his house or whatever, or the pathway, whatever, was at that time. And the deal was apparently struck, and they built the road, and it's ever since called the Croppy Road. So I think that's a nice piece of history. Father Murphy also had relatives in the area, Father John Murphy of Boolavogue fame, and he would have crossed the mountain shooting grouse and maybe pheasant, certainly the grouse, and visiting his relatives who lived very near the village in Michael. And he's supposed to have said his last mass before he was captured in Coolesnocta, in Jordan's of Coolesnocta. So that's another from that particular period. So we're proud to have those items, I suppose, to be able to record them and to be able to know that they are very historic.
Yeah, very interesting and quite varied as well. I suppose maybe next door to history and just thinking about archaeology. Do you have a favourite kind of archaeological site within the locality, or does anything kind of come to mind on?
We have the Adelaide Memorial Church is our pride and joy, and it was built in 1912. But its origins as well are linked with the big house. So we're back down kind of a couple of generations further on. And there was a minister living in the village at the time, a Church of Ireland minister. And his wife was by the name of Duguid. And her sister came to visit to where they lived at Dyfed, which is just outside the village. Well, within the boundaries, I suppose, of the village. And while she was here, like meeting the gentry, I suppose, and fraternising with that type of person, she fell in love with the then squire of the big house, who was Inglis Cornwall Brady. Now, they had moved from being Cornwall to Brady at this stage because the Cornwall name had died out, and one of the wives, who was a Brady, her brother inherited, and that's how they became the Cornwall Brady family. So she fell in love anyway with the squire Inglis, and they were to be married. But just before she died, just before they were to be married, she was involved in a riding accident, and she died as a result. And her father was a very rich person. He was Duguid, and he had travelled extensively throughout not just Europe, but he actually had gone to Mexico one time, where he went without money and without any arms, because he felt that it would be a very he felt he could get by on his charm, so he didn't need money, and he didn't feel that anybody would shoot him in the back. And I don't know, maybe he thought he'd be able to combat anybody that would face him up front. But he had, when Constance Duguid died, that was the girl, her parents put up a headstone over her, but it really was a big monument of a statue of innocence that she had admired apparently in Florence or in Europe, and they put that up over her grave. However, they noticed that the rain, the Irish weather, was not very suitable for the marble, the Carrara marble, and which was designed by the sculptor Farrell from Dublin. And they decided that they would build a church to house what was outside the grave. Now, I think the Reverend Petpeace, who was the minister at the time, was very influential in this, because maybe he saw that the church that was there at the time, maybe it was in bad repair, I'm not sure, but anyway they built the present church, the Adelaide Memorial Church. It's called Adelaide because when Constance's mother, who was called Adelaide, died, she wished to be buried with her daughter in Michael, and the ashes of the father are buried there as well. And it was built as a memorial of love to Adelaide.
Okay. And
it has amazing features, from carvings, wood carvings, the mosaics in the floor, the tiles, there's a copy of Leonardo's Last Supper. Everything was done to absolute amazing intricate details, and we're very proud of it. It's the county's architectural gem, really.
Okay. Just to the CUPHAT project is obviously looking at tourism as one of the areas, and I suppose maybe to just touch on that for a little while. When you have visitors or you have people asking for kind of recommendations about things to see or do locally, what do What do you recommend to people, or where do you bring people when they visit?
Well, we could bring them on the Heritage Trail, which incorporates the Adelaide Memorial Church, and we had a tour with youngsters here recently, and that took nearly 2 hours. So that is one of the things. That's just the immediate environment, of course, of the village. Then, of course, we usually take them up to the Nine Stones and let them look out on the whole area. That's equally as important. And then just slightly wider, I suppose, because I'm from St. Mullins, I'd always recommend St. Mullins as a place to visit. There's Altamount Gardens are close by, and there's quite a number of, in Carlow itself, it has maybe the nightlife that some people might want. It depends, I suppose, on what people want, but there's so many opportunities for hiking, cycling. The areas are very well, very good for those activities.
Who would your ideal visitor be in terms of tourism, or what kind of tourists would you like to see?
Well, I'd probably like to see, we probably get a lot of day trippers, and that's probably not the ideal. Probably like to see more coming and staying maybe a little bit longer, but then there's not that many there's not that many places for accommodation locally. Yeah, I've had a lot of visitors myself, actually. I've had some American visitors. I have some coming again in September, and I would always bring them to the Adelaide Church and around the village, and the Catholic Church too. Like, that's there since 1776, and it has a stained glass window to Saint Finian, who was born here, and a group of us did a tapestry of Saint Columbanus a few years ago, and that's hanging in the church. And naturally I'd bring them up the mountain, but yeah, we'd like, I suppose, people to stay a little bit longer. There's a couple of disadvantages. One is that there isn't enough accommodation, and the other is we don't have a cafe or a restaurant in the village. Whether the village could sustain one or not is a big question. We use the community centre a lot as a kind of a pop-up restaurant, particularly because we've had a good number of visitors coming because of the Columban Way, and we've had people coming on pilgrimage as such, so we would have had maybe a bus loads or at a time. We had our Welsh visitors, we've had various groups over the years, so we then, as I said, have it as a pop-up restaurant, but you're very dependent on the voluntary nature. We service the Carlow walking festivals as well here. It's always a point for registration, and sometimes we have soup and sandwiches or whatever at the end of the day, but again, you're looking at the voluntary capacity of the village and the community centre committee, and that puts a bit of a strain on people.
Sure, yeah, and you obviously need advance notice as well that this is that you
Well, now that you mention advance notice, we have a pretty active Facebook page for the village, Moisha News, and very often people are searching for their routes, but we've had a few examples of people who have just turned up out of the blue and kind of ask, in the shop or whatever, and they say, we're looking for our ancestors. So together with some social FOSS schemes, schemes like that, we have recorded all the graveyards in the whole parish, and we have them in book form, and they have been very useful. So generally the shopkeepers kind of say, look, maybe if you look through this you might find it, and that's useful. But I'm always amazed that people wouldn't contact us first, and then we'd have so much more to offer them. I know a couple of years ago a couple came, and it was the last day of their holiday, unfortunately, and they went to the shop, and before they went home that day, they had not, by talking to the shopkeepers, by the shopkeepers ringing up different people in the parish, they had not only found the place, the town's land where their ancestors had come from, probably around the time of the famine, but they had actually found the ruins of the house, and that the people in the house beside it gave them tea and everything, and they went back with a great appreciation of the area. Again, a few years ago, I happened to be over in the village, and there was this couple, and they were wandering around aimlessly, ladies, and I just said to them, can I help you in any way? And they said yes, they were researching their ancestors they were from Australia, and they said the name, and normally if you say Kavanagh or Murphy or something like that, especially Kavanagh here, I mean, there's 40 families of Kavanagh, so it's very difficult. But when they said the name to me, I knew exactly who they were. So it just so happened that I knew, and I rang the family, and they went to visit them, and it turned out that the particular family had a son in Australia, and not only have they been coming back here, but when that man was getting married in Australia, the Irish family met up with the Australian family, and it all happened over a chance meeting, and they might have come and they might never have got to know their relatives. So it would be just one thing I'd love if people looking for their ancestry would just contact us first, and we'd be able to have a lot of information for them maybe.
How long did it take to put the kind of information you have together around kind of mapping out all the
graves?
Yeah.
Well, the Lismaconley Cemetery, which is the now Catholic cemetery, was 100 years old in 2012. So it took us about, I suppose, I had just retired, and I had seen similar kind of projects done elsewhere, and I was very anxious that we might make a start on it. So all kinds of weather, we documented them all. Now, it was easy enough to do Lismaconley because it's a council burial ground, and we also were able at that time, data protection wasn't quite what it is now, and we were able to get the official graveyard book, so we were able to record everybody who was buried in it, whether there was a headstone up over them or not, which is very valuable really. The unfortunate thing about one of them was that they didn't always have the address of the person. For example, if they died in, and I hate using this, but the poorhouse, that's what the address was given, in Carlow or whatever.
There wasn't information about where they had lived
previously?
No,
no, it was just down as their address when they died. That was a pity. But in the main, we knew who they might have been. So we brought out a book for the Graveyard Mass of 2012, and that was, I suppose it took us the best part of a year really to do that. So then the Adelaide Memorial Church was 100 years in 2013, and I continued with the documenting of the graveyard there, but also researched as much history as we possibly could about the building of the church, and there was the Reverend Pettepiece, who was the minister at the time. His wife had written notes about the building as well, and they were very invaluable. So we produced a book for the centenary in September. So that took another kind of a year, and then it took us about 2 years, I suppose, maybe 3 even. I think it was 2015 then we did the rest of the cemetery. And Drumfay was very difficult because it's there's no records or anything like that. We just had to go on the headstones, but we did the best we could and read them all, and as much as we could.
Okay. And I know you've been involved as well in a couple of short films or documentaries that have kind of been looking at different elements of local history and heritage as well. Well,
for Heritage Week in the last couple of years, we did one where we had people talking about their school days and their old school, and we've also done the story of education in Michael, going back to the times of the saints and coming right up then, because we have a couple of things that are very important in an educational sense, in a historical sense as well. Collier, related to Collier's encyclopedia, and whose descendants would include Ardal O'Hanlon, who came here to film his Who Do You Think You Are? Collier went to America from the village here, and that was important in terms of education. And then there was another man called Dr. Byrne, who also went to America, and he had seen how bad things were for Irish people when they went to the States. He became a doctor and a lawyer, and he left in his will money. Basically, he wanted, I suppose, to put up a vocational school type, so that people going abroad wouldn't be ignorant, I suppose, and not able to cope with life when they went to the States or England or wherever they would have emigrated to, and emigration would have been very high here. And so he left in his will for something like that to happen, but by then it went through the courts. It took a good number of years, and by the time litigation was sorted, there was a vocational school in Bunclody, there was one in Tullow, there was one in Bagnallstown. So instead there is a trust fund, so that I don't know what will happen now in September, because primary schools are going to all have their books free, but since about 1982, I think, or 84, books have been free to all pupils in the parish, both at primary and secondary, and for third level then a grant has been given towards books under the Byrne Trust Fund.
That must be a huge sort of financial burden lifted in terms of expense for of parents with multiple children in school. And
now I know things have changed a bit over the years, because there's book rentals, but it would have paid for that if that was what went on in the school.
Okay. To change tack completely, maybe, and talk a little bit more about the outdoors. What are the most interesting features of the physical landscape locally for you?
The mountain is the one that always stands out, and like in winter it's fabulous to look up at it, but it also brings the hardship, I suppose, as well, of people trying to gather in their animals and so on. And in the summer it's lovely, and then of course there's the mast on the top of it, the RTE mast there on the top. It always stands out. That would be the ruggedness, maybe. I like the ruggedness, and again probably because my grandparents came from exactly the same type of landscape, and when I was growing up, even though like I wasn't as close to the mountain as either of my parents were born into, I always looked at the mountain. And I one of my cousins went to County Meath, and she'd been born in Cummer, right on the mountain, and I couldn't understand when I went to visit her how she could be happy living away from the mountain. I don't think I could, funnily enough. Like, while I loved college and being in Dublin and everything like that, and I originally thought I'd probably like to have stayed in the city, but the job ended up in Graignamanagh, and I came home, and it was maybe handy. Now I couldn't live without being near a mountain.
It's just talk to me a little bit about the sort of experience of walking and that as well. You said you'd be kind of a regular rambler, would you? In
it's something I suppose I'm after coming into a bit more. I wouldn't have done any walking, maybe too busy or whatever, rearing children and teaching and whatever, and community life. But now my husband is retired now, and we enjoy going walking. So we've been trying to walk the entire Barrow way, from in stages, of course, now not all at the one time, We've just a little bit to do to get to Robertstown in County Kildare, and we've been doing a bit of the Greenway as well. But our favourite places are always back home. We drive to either Kilbranish or to the Nine Stones and walk off up onto the Slieve Bawn or Mount Leinster, which is a bit more challenging because it's on the tarmac. I prefer walking on the ground of the mountain. And funnily, the Leinster Long Puck competition was held there recently, and one of the days that we were walking up there, we met this guy with his hurl and ball, and he was last year's overall winner, and he was I don't know, was he practicing for this year or not, because I think he automatically gets back in, but he told us it was a fantastic venue. So they hurled the ball right up from at the Nine Stones, right up beyond the cairn, a couple of 100 metres beyond the cairn, and back down again, and whoever has the least number of pucks wins the competition. So it is a Kilkenny man won it again this year. But there was one photograph taken that was is absolutely fabulous of our own Carlow participant, and he was from Michael, as it turns out, and you can see the hurl and the ball and the mountain behind him, and it's absolutely amazing, and it spells I think so much about the area. It's kind of a real Crucullen kind of picture from history, but today.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about Slieve Bawn.
I don't know the origins of it. I don't know the history of it. It's just, I suppose, easy, accessible for a good walk. The Tullow Mountaineering Group and the Blackstairs Ramblers go up there, I think, pretty regularly. And it's better to be going up there when your feet are trodding the heather and the mountain, and you feel close to nature, I suppose. Haven't seen any deer up there, but you do see deer pretty regularly in Kilbranish. It's probably a bit more sheltered for them in that, you know. I suppose what is devastating is the wildfires, you know, and of course the farmers burn the heather as well at certain times of the year, and you know, we see the helicopter from our house. I can see, you know, the helicopter maybe coming with the water, or sometimes I can see the red sky. And I don't know, I suppose it's a tradition that farmers have, some of them, and they're probably entitled to do what they always did, but it's different nowadays because we're trying to protect our wildlife, and it's awful in places when we're going walking and you see the devastation that the fires have caused, when they get out of control, and plus the risk to life with the people who are trying to combat the fires, the fire brigade and so on. I don't know what to think about that. It's you know, I'd like to hear from a farmer who lives up near there, and they probably wouldn't tell you that they were burning the mountain anyway.
One of the things that is featured in a couple of my conversations on this project was around COVID, and maybe how that changed some people's relationship with their area. Maybe some people discovered places within their allotted 5k that maybe they didn't know existed. I don't know if that's something that
I'd say it was very important here.
In this area.
Yeah, it would have been important here because we have a lot more walkers, and people would be taken to the, you know, outside the countryside more, and I think that was very good for families as well. Personally, I didn't really mind COVID. Well, some things I suppose you didn't like about it, but in general it gave me time to look at different projects and catch up on a few things that I liked to have had time to do previously when you couldn't visit outside the county. But I think it had a bad effect on, especially here, it's so isolating. Up near, again, if I could refer to kind of Rahinley, Nagira, Colasnocht, those townslands, like very isolating, and people were very lonely. And I remember our postman saying to us, at times he was the only person that they might see, and even at that, he couldn't really, talk to them much behind the mask and so on. There was a few good projects. Carlow County Council, the Sports Partnership, had a few good projects that suited. So there was doorstep dances was one of them that somebody was able to come to individual houses if they wanted to. We documented actually different aspects of COVID we have a parish magazine that we do once a year. And I think it's probably one of the most interesting magazines in our 30-year history of all, because we asked different people how they were coping with COVID. So we have a little account from a public health nurse, from the health centre, we have a great grandmother, and we have a doctor, we have young people as comments on how they were coping with COVID. We have images from the children because they couldn't go to school, from COVID as well. And then we looked to our diaspora all over the world. So we have people from New Zealand, Australia, US, Canada, all commenting on what COVID was like in their particular countries. So as I said, it's probably one of the most interesting publications that we have had.
Okay. I know one of the projects that we've discussed previously around COVID was a lace project that you were part of, but I know lace is a kind of a wider or a longer story as well. Do you want to just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I'm a member of the Boris Lace Makers, and Boris Lace was first introduced by Lady Harriet Kavanagh into Boris during the famine as a means for people to make more money, I suppose. And even though she wasn't in Boris at the time of the famine, I think she was wandering all over Europe. But anyway, it was introduced, and it had more or less died out. It in the 60s. There was a few revivals, but then eventually, anyway, a lady from Australia came over, and she had a workshop. She was a lace maker, and she had a workshop. And I was one of a number of people who attended that workshop, probably because my mother was a Kavanagh, probably because I think my uncle used to visit Boris' house on some occasions, I think whenever he was looking for ancestry and stuff like that. I don't know if they were connected at all, but anyway, I felt I'd like to learn how to do Boris lace, and as I might have said earlier, I was always interested in kind of crafts, so I learned the craft, and then after that a few of us got together and started up what is now known as Boris Lace Makers, and we have about 25 people in it now. But during COVID, we had a very interesting project. We had a couple of, because we couldn't meet, all our meetings were by Zoom, and we did the lace separately then in our houses. And then we had a couple of very good projects. We had, the pubs were closed, so we had a couple of window exhibitions. And one of them was where we had different items that were associated with COVID. It was called Lockdown Lace, and I did one of County Carlow. So it's using the stitches from the Boris Lace, but not any of the Boris Lace patterns as such. It's my own pattern of the county, where you had to stay in your own county. So I did all the parishes that are in County Carlow, and that was but others did the viaducts actually in Boris, which is a very important part of their landscape, because people were walking the viaducts at the time, and somebody else did a cottage or something for the staycation and that kind of thing. But the biggest project that we had was a combination with ourselves and South Armagh, and the South Armagh group did Carrickmacross lace, and they completed a wall hanging with, I think it was 19 pieces, and we did one in Borrislace of 19 pieces, but one of our pieces went on their wall hanging and one of theirs came on ours, and the one that was on ours was depicting a lighthouse, and it was in memory of John Hume, who was a beacon of light. So that was a very interesting project, and it was all done through Zoom and through connecting through Zoom. So that was one of the projects during COVID that I was involved in.
You're back to in-person gatherings now, I
Oh,
presume,
we are.
for that.
We are. Yeah, we're back, and we're doing. At the moment, we're involved with a project that is involving the men's shed, Matera in Italy. It's a part of the EU Craft Hub, and also a sculptor. So we did some clay works as well, based on the designs of of the original Borrislace patterns as well, and it's quite interesting. There's going to be a very big exhibition in the Visual in Carlow in the end of August and the beginning of September. So we're looking forward to that at the moment, and hopefully there'll be a group coming from Italy as well to be involved in that. And there's other crafts from the general area that will be on display as well. We have a very well-known wood turner living in the parish of Michael, actually, who is Glenn Lucas, and he has visitors. For example, when you're talking about tourism, he has people who come to learn the art of wood turning from all over the world, and sometimes their partners come and do a bit of the Borrislace. So that's an aspect of tourism that probably could be developed a lot more as well, with other crafts, you know.
Just want to touch briefly on the idea of kind of place and place identity, and just kind of wondering how you talk about or introduce the place where you're from. If you're in Dublin or you're in Killarney, what do you say to people, or is the name of Michael known to people that you'd meet kind of in other parts of the country?
Well, when I'd say I'm from Michael, I'd say, you know, it's not too far from Carlow. We're on the Wexford-Carlow border. I'd probably always say that. But even as far away as Turkey, when I'm from Michael, I'd say you might have heard of it, because we have a famous bone setter called Danny O'Neill, who lives there, and there have been many documentaries and so on there. But at one stage, as I said, when I was in Turkey, and I said that we were from the same place as Richie Kavanagh, people recognised the Ain Focalela. So I suppose it's known for that as much as it is. I think in particularly the bone setting up to now was very prominent, with people coming from all over Ireland in particular to get mended, have their bones mended. My own maternal great grandmother supposedly had some kind of bone setting ability. Now I never really heard my mother talking about it, but my aunt, who is now in her late 80s, has told me that when she was a small child, she remembers, this would be my grandfather's mother, and she remembers a child or somebody being brought to the house of my grandfather in Templeludigan, which is on the Wexford side, and that she treated this child. So she must have had some kind of bone setting ability, but it didn't come down through the generations anyway. At least I wouldn't like to try my hand at mending a bone. But I have to tell you that my first encounter with probably anybody from Michael was when I had to visit the bone setter. You mightn't believe this, but when we were on our honeymoon, I fell into a lake, Lake Windermere actually, biggest lake, and my husband pulled me out anyway, which he regrets to this day, he says. And afterwards I kind of had a niggle in my knee, and when I came back here, we were living. Our own house wasn't completed at the time, And the first person I had to go to was Danny O'Neill to get my knee fixed. And I remember the first Sunday, or it was a Monday evening, I think, and PJ brought me up and we were sitting outside, and Danny would always say, and where are you from? And I remember saying, I think I have to say Michael now, and he just gave the big jerk and I fainted. And like Danny's son, who I'd be very friendly with now, in fact I taught Danny's daughters, and they were giving me water to revive me and so on. But I have to say, the knee has been perfect ever since. But it was an interesting encounter, the very first encounter coming to Michael, And I remember the first Sunday after that at Mass, it was all bandaged up, my knee, and the way everybody would know that you were the newcomer. And the good going away outfit, which we always had to have at weddings at that time, on me at Mass, and I couldn't even kneel down because of the knee. So I'm sure people were looking at me doubly as to what had happened.
Very good. I just wanted to touch on the idea of cultural heritage and natural heritage, and maybe get your kind of understanding of what those terms sort of mean for you, and what are the kind of local examples of cultural heritage and natural heritage that come to mind.
Well, I suppose the natural heritage, for me, that is the very landscape, the mountain, again, I suppose the Barrow would be important for me, even though it's part of my home area. But like the Burren River flowing down from the mountain as well, that would be kind of the natural landscape that I would think first of when I think about it. The cultural landscape, well, I suppose I think in terms of the stories, the songs, the music. This would have a good tradition of drama here as well, and also the accordions, the fiddle players, the dancers. There was a Michael set dance. I don't know, it's not that popular at the moment, but we did have it reenacted on a number of occasions for big celebrations here. And the storytelling, I think, is very important. We had Jim Nolan was known, again, practically all over Ireland. He was, on the Late Late Show. He was performed at various venues, not only in the county, but in the general area as well. He had his own recitations. He made up his own recitations based on the experiences of life. He had one on, say, for example, the confirmation class, where he went through different people. He also has a beautiful one about the beauty of Mount Leinster. He has ones on the sounds we used to hear, so talking about the corncrake and various, the cricket and different birds and whatever of time past. And he had his own tapes and video of those. So I think that's an important aspect as well of our cultural background here.
When you mention Danny O'Neill and the bone setter there, it just reminded me, is there anything in the way of cures or folklore from the area or the kind of wider locality?
Yeah, there were a good few cures. Well, I suppose the bone setting was the big one. Because it not only had Danny the gift, but his uncle had as well, and various members of the family. But as well as that, we did a project a few years back on cures in the area, and there was one, I think it was a skin disease maybe, where a Nolan who married a Nolan, and Nolan is a very popular name in the area, had a cure. And also at that time I remember getting a letter from a local person who he had his father or grandfather maybe had received it, and it was from somebody living up in Donegal who had got some kind of an ointment that was made down here, and he had a cure as well. I think it might have been for a skin disease, but we have researched them now. They're not all coming to mind at the minute, but there's quite a number of cures. Bloodletting, stopping the blood was another one. The Kyo's had that, and I don't know if they still have it, but they had a prayer, and then there was a cure for well, of course, different things that are different medicines that were made from maybe different herbs and so on as well. But some of these recipes, like the one actually Danny O'Neill and Margaret, his sister, had would put on when your bone would be set, that they would put a charge on it, and this charge was made from different herbs and things, but that was a secret. And then they had Nail's lotion, which I suppose officially it should be called O'Neill's lotion, but everybody called it Nail's lotion. And this was something that you rubbed on the affected area afterwards, and that was made by pharmacy in Graignamanagh, Cassan's pharmacy. They had but it's not used anymore now. The bone seemingly is fixed straight off without any of these different things. And there was a cure for ringworm as well. People would have had that, and there would be different things that would be known to have cures, and people who are known to have cures.
Because I remember that lotion was one of the items that you brought to the heritage event in Rathnewer
That's right.
in November. Yeah, very kind of distinctive.
That was there from when I fell into the lake and broke my or hurt my knee. So there was still a drop left in it, I think. I wonder if it was analysed what would be in it now.
It did the job anyway.
Oh, it did. Perfect. Yeah.
Good stuff. Can I ask about the local kind of rock and soil types? What would you know about those?
Well, I suppose granite is the Carlow granite is one of the main geological rocks. So it's considered hard. The Adelaide Memorial Church was going to be built apparently using granite, but it was too hard to actually cut and so on site. I'm sure when you're talking about over 100 years ago, it would have been very difficult. And so it's the base is limestone, and then there's kind of bathstone and sandstone in the building.
Okay. Just to return maybe to the topic of tourism for a minute, is this an area that has brought in tourists, or would people who are maybe living abroad, who are from the area originally, would they have sort of come back on a regular basis, or what did kind of outside visitors look like in times past, say?
I suppose we have a combination of people who are returning maybe to seek their roots, and of course even present day emigrants, if you like to call them that, coming back to visit home. Then you have people who just come for the scenery, would be a big attraction, probably more than the value of the village as such. And that'd be mostly where the tourists have come. Now, we've been making great strides to improve the area and to attract visitors. Like we had big activities like the Gathering, for example. We had quite a number who came for that, but we were lucky that it coincided with the 100th anniversary of the Adelaide Memorial Church. So we had people who came from the States. Actually, we had members of the Duguid family from England, and we had members of the Cornwall Brady family from America, who both came for that. So that was one thing. Then we in 1998 we produced a little booklet on Moishel, which its aim was to attract people to the village, and we covered different things in that. Then we've had a few brochures, like we're all the time trying to develop. We've had Welcome to Michael brochure, which came about thankfully from funding from the council or whatever. The AURUS programme as well has been very beneficial to us, and we have at the moment we have a Columban Way brochure just developed as well, and we're all the time, I suppose, trying to promote these, and we have them in the Carlow Tourism Office. We also would be a member of our Winter Natira is on the Carlow Tourism board. I'm the PPN representative on the Heritage Forum in Carlow as well, so we'd be promoting as much as we could through these different avenues. And we use social media as well. We have Twitter and we have Facebook, so we would be doing as much as we can, what you can do in a voluntary capacity to promote the tourism. And we're always open and welcome to new adventures, new activities. 98 brought a lot of visitors to the area as well, whether it was just for a once off or whether they stayed for a while. A lot of the diaspora might have come back for that. Even small things, I suppose, like the annual cemetery days would bring back people. We're always asked, what time is it at and what day is it on and so on. So whether it's a day trip or people are coming for walking trips for a week, we're open and welcome to visitors all the time, and making as many advances as we can to promote tourism.
Tell me a little bit more about the Columban Way. You had mentioned that you're recently back from an international trip there.
Yeah, we're back we signed a charter in St. Gallen in Switzerland for Columban's Day, and we're trying to promote the Columban Way, which we believe St. Columbanus was born in the shadow of the mountain and of Mount Leinster, so hence in the Blackstairs range, and we commemorated his birth in 2015, the 1400th anniversary, and since then the legacy, we need to leave a legacy behind. We had something on practically every month for that particular year. There was a national stamp launched, for example, and we had these different, as I'd call them, pilgrimages coming here to Michael to look at the home of St. Columbanus, particularly groups from that are associated with the Columban missionaries. And because the church might be declining here, but in places like the Philippines and Korea and so on, there are young girls entering the convent, and there are new priests being professed or whatever, they ordained in places like that. So part of, for example, the Columban sisters, part of the formation for some of the young sisters would be for them to visit the home of the birthplace of St. Columbanus, and that's here. So we have been welcoming people from that. So it's kind of religious tourism, I suppose, in a sense, is what you could call it. And the legacy then was that we would develop a pilgrim path that he might have taken, to promote the pilgrim path that he might have taken from Michael to Bangor in County Down and then across Europe. So over the past few years, we have been engaging with communities from here to, and in particular Bangor itself, and then in France, where there was a foundation, a Columbanus foundation in France. I've been twice, and then Switzerland now, and in Bobbio in Italy, where he had his last foundation and where he died. So the links are forming all the time, and the signing of the charter was very important because it's hoping to have, social, cultural, sporting things, even like the lace, for example, in Luxeuil in France. They have practically the very same type of lace as we have in Boris. Rugby is another it's one of the sports that is popular maybe in around Bobbio in Italy, and the links with maybe rugby clubs here. And then in Carlow we have had Sean O'Brien, who has been famous in rugby terms, in not only in Ireland but basically all over Europe. And so links can be made, that are very valuable, especially in attracting visitors, or communicating between two different groups, whether it within Ireland or outside of it.
Yeah. To change tack completely, I know one of the things that you touched on in the piece you read, I'm a child of the Blackstairs, was the travelling shop. Can you tell me a little bit about the travelling shop?
Now I'm sure it was very different when my father was young, but as I never knew my grandparents on my father's side, but a lot of summers we went for holidays to my grandmother's house, my maternal grandmother's house, which was at the Wexford side, and in Templeludigan. And every Tuesday the travelling shop used to come. So the name of the person who had the travelling shop in my time, and I suppose we're talking now 60 years ago when I think about it, was Hamilton. So he came from New Ross, and he had his van, and in that van was everything that my grandmother would have wanted. So she would basically be buying the tea, the sugar, maybe jam, because I don't think she made her own jam, the flour, of course, things that, like, they probably only went to town maybe once a month, if that, and it would have been in the Pony and Trap. Even when I was that age, they did. I think my uncle had a car, but I'm not sure at what stage he would have got the car. He had a Morris Minor, and so the big thing about Hamilton, we looked forward to that Tuesday coming because we would get a bar of chocolate. Granny would buy us a bar of chocolate, and there was a workman that worked with Granny and grandfather, and he was called Big Jim, and or Old Jim, and Old Jim would buy us a bar of chocolate as well. So we loved the travelling shop, loved it. No, not eggs, because they would have had their own eggs and milk, but things that they wouldn't have had would have been in the travelling shop.
It's a reminder as well, I suppose, of how local things were in terms of getting anywhere, the equivalent of the weekly shop, or I suppose the worlds and the kind of geography involved was much more confined, just as a result of transport and
never even my parents would they certainly, I doubt if they ever spent a night in a hotel in their whole lives, they wouldn't have had need for it. Now, they went to Knock every year on the train, and the train, you see, went through Borris and Ballywilliam, so the train was very important at that time, and anywhere they would have gone then until we had cars and could bring them and whatever, the travelling shop was important. And I was reminded of it, funnily enough, in COVID, when I started getting my own groceries delivered, and Tesco are still coming to my house. It's made a full circle at the end of the day. The same as the things like the taps, the barrel under the chute to collect the water. All of these things are kind of coming back now, and they were thrown out for a while, but they're all back again.
You mentioned that you've no memory of your parents going on holidays. What was your sort of first holiday, or when did holidays kind of become a thing?
Well, we just went to Granny's on holidays, and it was great because we used to pick frockins, and we were brought later because we had thinned beet, and turnips and mangels and that kind of thing. So we were there as help as we got older, or helped in the kitchen while others were out thinning the beat. And such hard labour, really, when you think about it, you know. They were the only holidays I had until I became a teacher and was able to afford to properly go on a holiday.
Yeah, as you said, hotels just weren't. That
No.
just wasn't a
No,
done thing.
no, never. I think I probably spent. I'd say I was well married even myself. Oh no, I suppose the honeymoon.
Other than your honeymoon.
Honeymoon, yeah, would have been the first time that I'd have stayed in a hotel, and even then it was more bed and breakfast than hotels. You know, you just couldn't believe that you'd stay in a hotel. You know.
And was that kind of related to farm, or was that everyone? Did people just?
I didn't know anybody that had
didn't
ever
do
have
that.
thought about going to a hotel. You'd be really a big shot if you went to. I just hardly even knew about the names of hotels. I know there was the Majestic in Tramore, where people might have gone for the actual weddings. You know, but that, other than that, I can't even remember the name of a hotel up until, again, like when I was grown up.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned at the just before we started the recording was the green sash. Do you want to tell me about the green sash?
Well, I suppose there were two things that, like I said in my bit of an account, there were two things that everybody looked forward to when I was growing up. And my father would have looked forward to two things. We just looked forward to one, and that was the pattern in St. Mullins. Really big event. Every year it was the most important event in the whole year. And we would have got new clothes once a year. Twice a year. We'd have got winter clothes and we'd have got summer clothes. And the summer clothes would have come for the religious examination by the diocesan examiner, who would come the once a year, and everybody would be in their absolute best clothes. And then you'd be allowed to, well, for girls anyway, I presume, I don't know what way it was for the boys, but the girls would have had their clothes, their best dress then for the pattern. And in my time for the pattern, we would be saving up beforehand. The hedges would be cut, the house would nearly be painted, whitewashed, whatever was going to be going on before the pattern. Everything revolved around the pattern. We'd be hoping people would come and give us money so that we'd have money to spend on the pattern. And so the pattern in St. Mullins wasn't your usual religious ceremony. It was, there was rosary in the graveyard, all right, but we had no interest whatsoever in the rosary in the graveyard. It was all, and then I didn't have anybody really buried there that I knew anyway. It was all about the hucksters on the green in St. Mullins. And I know my grandfather died actually after the pattern in St. Mullins a few days, because he seemingly had a few drinks at the pattern, and he must have had prostate problems, and he was brought to hospital, I think, which was pretty rare as well, and he died after the pattern in St. Mullins. So but my in 19 there's a moat in St. Mullins, so you'd climb the moat, but we weren't allowed as children, because my mother would have thought it was for courting couples and things like that, and we daredn't go up on the moat on the pattern Sunday. Basically what we did was we went around trying to see, there was a Wheel of Fortune. She would have won lots of things on the Wheel of Fortune, as would every house in the parish. I'd say in St. Mullins, Rathnewer, the whole area, I'd say every house of my parents' time would have ornaments like the pair of dogs that were on the mantelpiece and vases that were won in the Wheel of Fortune in the pattern of St. Mullins. So in 1938, 1948, and again in 1998, there were very big celebrations coinciding with the pattern to commemorate 1798, because there's a penal altar in St. Mullins, and the moat is a lookout for scouts and whatever, that in times of religious strife, they obviously had to come together to pray at the penal altar that's in St. Mullins. So those troubled times caused a lot of hardship in the area, despite the fact that that whole area was governed by the Kavanaghs of the MacMurrough Kavanaghs of boroughs, who in the main were good to their tenants and so on. But some of the other landlords, I suppose, in the area, and particularly in Graignamanagh and that kind of area, maybe weren't quite as kind. And so the commemorations, and my grandfather was on the White Horse in 1938, and my father, now he wasn't leading the group as my grandfather was in 1948, and he would have worn a green sash. He was riding the horse belonged to the person who was his employer at the time, because he was the farm labourer for her, and he wore this sash. And in 1998 my son wore the green sash because Mammy had kept it all the years, and I wore it here a week or two ago when we had a kind of a commemoration here in Michael.
Lovely.
Yeah.
The other thing that you mentioned around the
other commemorate. The other thing was the
event was the
meetings
on
on the mountain.
Yeah.
Now I have no memory of that at all. I was never at that. But my father was 96 before he died, and he was very alert, and he used to come to me every year at Halloween on holidays, when I'd be on holidays from school, because I had apple trees, and he was very fond of an apple tart, and he would peel apples every year when he'd come, and I'd make tarts and he'd have them for the rest of the year in the freezer or whatever, and he would tell me things. That's how I know about different aspects of his life from what he was telling me, and I would have jotted down a few things here and there. And he would have said about the meetings that he really looked forward to that every year, and he would meet his cousins from the Carlow side, and in particular, even though now they're based more in Wexford, where the Shannons were related to him, and I know Martin Shannon attended some of the CUPHAT projects as well. So his mother, Rita Shannon, and he loved meeting his cousins at the meetings, and obviously it was a big festival, and it involved the frockin picking and all of those kind of traditions that were around. Now I remember picking frockins myself up on the Blackstairs, on the Carlow side of the Blackstairs, because one of my best friends in secondary school was from Ballycrinnigan as well, as it turned out, where my own maternal grandparents were from, and we went out a few times now up, and all I can remember is having the big purple face from all the ones I ate, but other neighbours of ours now would have had stories. There was a man called Peter Keeley who used to visit my father every Sunday night. The two of them were great friends and much the same age, and he visited until my father died, actually 5 years ago, and he remembered selling the frockins and how much he got for them and so on, but Daddy doesn't seem to have done that.
Okay. Just a couple of kind of reflections maybe before we finish. What's the best thing about living here?
The people. People are interesting. Community life, for me, that's very important. And the landscape.
And what's the thing you'd most like to change about the area?
I hate seeing the signs of depression and not just depression, I suppose, but I hate seeing the shops closed. I hate seeing that there's no real life for young people. I'd love to see a bit more, but I suppose young people anyway, it's very difficult to please them in a sense. You're never going to have the nightlife, say, that's in Carlow or in Dublin or whatever here. I'd like to see young people looked after better. I despite the fact that we don't have opportunity even for nightclubs or things like that, there's still drugs are available locally. I hate seeing that. I wish, for that wasn't a part of life for the young people. Love the fact that they can involve themselves in sport. I'd like to see maybe more for those who have no opportunity, who have no interest in playing sport. You have the hurling and you have the football. There was a soccer club, but it has kind of disappeared. There's rounders now. I think it's good for adults, but kind of feel I'd love to see more for people who have no interest in sport, and that they could get involved in more activities.
What are the challenges facing the area?
I suppose the usual challenges that face any rural area, like you have isolation, you have transport problems. There's a lot of talk about green, sharing cars and things like this. You can't really do that in a rural area. I think as well it can bring mental health issues. Isolation can bring mental health issues, and while we might love the whole rugged landscape of the area and the mountainous area, it's tough maybe for some people to make a living. Farming has a lot of challenges going with it now as well. You can't make a living now on a few acres of land. It has to be intensified, and then you have all the green issues as well that are going with that, and that's difficult. So I think lack of industry as well. We haven't really got any major factory or anything like that. You have to go to the towns for these things, and I suppose as well as that, while it's nice, like I have a bungalow, I live in a bungalow, and that was bungalow bliss period when we got married and were setting up. It's not something that is welcomed in the country now, so you have more housing estates, but then that brings maybe some of its own problems, where you have people who might like to live in more rural areas, but planning permission you don't get anymore for once-off houses, kind of. I would think the schools are good, so I think education is well looked after. The church, of course, is declining. Both churches, both the Adelaide, the congregations to both churches. So religion is not that important to people anymore. But sometimes you have to make good with what you have, and for those who can't accept that, I think life in Michael, the same as any nearly rural area, can be tough.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to mention, Brigid, before we finish? Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you wanted to discuss?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered an awful lot more than I thought you were going to, so there's not very much left.
Great. Well, thanks very much for being so generous with your time, Brigid, and I'll stop the recording now. Thanks.